He hugged me and took me to the shower. He turned on the water I didn't have at my house. We continued there. I was curious about the package, so I took it in my hand and opened my mouth. As it disappeared in my mouth, I slowed down and stopped at the sound it made. I hadn't experienced something like this for a long time. His gaze from above said, "Continue." He raised his head and closed his eyes tightly, as if he was deeply moved. He continued rapidly, one after another, saying, "It's coming, trust me. You always experience this excitement, whether you're experienced or young. Oh, hello. Were you here?" Let me start from the beginning. It started as a simple favor. At least that's what I told myself. When you live in a quiet cul-de-sac, everyone knows everyone else, and little requests, like borrowing a cup of sugar or watching someone's dog, aren't unusual. So, when the neighbors asked me to keep an eye on their house while they went on a family vacation, I didn't think twice. The Thompsons were a nice family, always friendly in passing. Their 2 sons, Ethan and Liam, were in their early 20s, full of the kind of energy and charm that made me smile every time they waved while mowing the lawn or bringing in groceries. I'd often catch them shooting hoops in the driveway or washing their car with music blasting, their youthful laughter carrying over to my side of the fence. Ethan, the younger one, had this easygoing confidence about him. Sandy brown hair that always seemed perfectly messy, and a grin that could light up a room. Liam, a couple of years older, was more reserved but no less striking, with dark eyes that hinted at a quieter intensity. Both of them had grown up next door, and while I'd always seen them as the kids next door, there was no denying they weren't kids anymore. The family left town on a sunny Friday morning, their SUV packed to the brim with suitcases, snacks, and a cooler for the road. I waved goodbye from my porch, thinking nothing of it. Just another routine week where I'd water their plants and bring in the mail. But then the water went out. It happened 2 days after they left. I was in my kitchen, enjoying the rare quiet of a Saturday morning, when my husband, Peter, mentioned it. He was busy with work, spending most of his time holed up in his office, leaving me to deal with the day-to-day annoyances of suburban life. "The water's out next door," he said casually, as though it wasn't about to become the turning point in my life. Being the neighborly person I was, I walked over to check. It felt strange stepping into their house without them there. The air was still, heavy with the absence of the life that usually filled it. The familiar scent of their home, a mix of clean laundry and something faintly woodsy, lingered as I walked through, checking faucets and making sure everything else was in order. That's when I saw it. A small handwritten note on the kitchen counter. "If there's any trouble, call Ethan." Below that, his number was neatly scrawled in black ink. I stared at it for a moment, longer than I probably should have, my heart skipping a beat. It didn't seem like a big deal at the time, just a neighborly gesture to let him know about the water issue. Nothing more. But as I stood there in the empty house, sunlight streaming through the kitchen window, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound, something shifted. Just as I was about to call the number, something caught my attention. The faint, unmistakable sound of water running. For a moment, I thought I must have imagined it. After all, the water was supposed to be out, wasn't it? But then it grew louder, more distinct. The steady rhythm of droplets striking tile. Curiosity overruled caution as I followed the sound, my bare feet padding softly across the wooden floor. The noise led me to the bathroom at the end of the hall, the one the boys used. The door was slightly ajar. Through the crack, I could see steam curling out, clinging to the cool air of the hallway. My heart raced as I pushed the door open a little further, just enough to peek inside. And there he was, Ethan. He stood under the stream of water, his head tilted back, droplets clinging to his sun-kissed skin as they cascaded over him. The shower door was frosted, but not enough to obscure the shape of him. Lean, toned, the body of someone who spent their days moving, living. My breath caught in my throat. What was he doing here? Weren't they all supposed to be out of town? I knew I should leave. I should quietly step back, pretend I hadn't seen anything, and walk out of the house like none of this had happened. But I couldn't. My feet felt rooted to the spot, my mind swirling with questions. And something else. Something I didn't want to name but couldn't deny. As if sensing my presence, Ethan turned, his movements unhurried. For a moment, I thought the frosted glass would save me. But then, his gaze locked onto mine through the haze of steam. He didn't flinch. He didn't cover himself. He just stood there watching me as I watched him, the air between us growing heavier with each passing second. I opened my mouth to say something. Anything to break the unbearable tension. But the words wouldn't come. My hand tightened around the edge of the doorframe as his lips curved into the faintest hint of a smirk, like he knew exactly what was running through my mind. Finally, he stepped out. A towel slung low around his hips, droplets still trailing down his chest. His proximity was electric. I could feel the heat radiating off his skin as he stood before me, close enough that I could see the flecks of gold in his hazel eyes. "I thought you were on vacation," I managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper. His smirk widened, but he didn't respond. Instead, he reached past me, his arm brushing mine as he grabbed another towel from the rack. The contact was fleeting, but it sent a jolt through me, an undeniable spark that left me feeling dizzy. "I stayed behind," he said finally, his tone casual, like we were discussing the weather and not standing inches apart in his family's empty house. I wanted to ask why. I wanted to demand an explanation, to remind him that this wasn't appropriate, that I shouldn't be here. But I didn't. Instead, I just stood there, the weight of the moment pressing down on me, drowning out every rational thought. And then he did something that caught me completely off guard. He reached out, his fingers brushing lightly against my wrist. The touch so gentle it could have been accidental, if not for the way his eyes stayed fixed on mine. "You okay?" he asked, his voice low, almost teasing. It was such a simple question, but it shattered something in me. The polite facade, the carefully constructed boundaries, the years of being the dependable neighbor, the faithful wife. All of it crumbled in that instant. "I should go," I whispered. But my body betrayed me, staying exactly where I was. And Ethan didn't step back. Instead, his hand lingered, his thumb tracing slow, deliberate circles against my skin. The tension between us was unbearable. And yet, I didn't want it to end. I don't know who moved first. Maybe it was me. Maybe it was him. Maybe it was the inevitability of it all. The slow unraveling of everything we were supposed to be. But before I knew it, the space between us disappeared. And his lips were on mine. Software insistent, igniting something I hadn't felt in years. The kiss was brief, just a moment stolen out of time. But it was enough to set my world spinning. When we pulled back, his eyes searched mine, questioning, challenging, daring me to admit what we both already knew. The heat of that moment hung in the air, as tangible as the steam clinging to the bathroom walls. I hadn't planned on staying. I hadn't planned on any of this. But my feet betrayed me. Every step I took toward the front door felt impossible, like I was walking through quicksand, each moment stretching longer than it should. Before I turned, I felt Ethan behind me, his presence magnetic, drawing me back. My breath caught as I looked up at him, still wrapped in nothing but the towel that clung to his hips, clinging to him as if it didn't want to let go either. His skin was still damp, catching the dim afternoon light seeping through the frosted bathroom window. He moved closer. The air between us buzzed with a weight I could feel, crackling against my skin. My back touched the cool surface of the hallway wall, sending a shiver through me that had nothing to do with the heat. Ethan's fingers found my wrist again, but this time, there was no hesitation. His grip was firm but gentle, keeping me grounded, even as I felt like I was going to float away. His touch was electric, his fingers following the curve of my arm, leaving a trail of fire in their wake. I closed my eyes for a moment, but it only made everything worse. the faint scent of soap and warm skin, the damp warmth of his body, the irregular rhythm of our breaths, the space between us growing impossibly narrow. When his hand reached my shoulder, he paused, his thumb brushing the edge of my collarbone. The slightest movement, but it felt like the world had slipped from under my feet. I opened my eyes, met his gaze, and the intensity there stole any remaining calm I had. He leaned down, his forehead touching mine, a silent closeness that quickened my pulse. His breath brushed my cheek, a subtle, intoxicating blend of mint and something unique to him. When his lips finally found mine again, they weren't rushed or desperate. Every movement was deliberate, slow, as if he were memorizing me, savoring the forbidden indulgence. The bulge of the package showed through the towel, and my mouth watered at the sight of him, at the thought of him. As he moved, the towel shifted slightly. His hands found my waist, steadying me, pulling me closer, until there was no space between us. His touch was everywhere, his fingers following the curve of my hips, his palms pressing into my back. The warmth of his skin hit mine like a brand. He hugged me and led me into the shower. He turned on the water I didn't have at my house. We continued here. I was curious about the package, so I took it in my hand, opened my mouth, and as it disappeared between my lips, I slowed down, pausing at the sound it made. I hadn't experienced something like this in a long time. His gaze from above told me everything. Continue. He raised his head, eyes squeezed shut, as if he were deeply moved. He continued rapidly, one after another. It's coming. Trust me. He said it with certainty, with urgency. You always experience this excitement, whether you're experienced or young. And in this case, I was excited too. I could see that what he was anticipating was something big, and I couldn't wait to see it. Just as that thought settled, I felt it. A big vibration in the package. Then, the liquid began to flow from the corner of my mouth. It was delicious. But I wasn't full yet. I stood up, sliding the package against my lips one last time before pressing it against my muffin. A wave of euphoria hit me as I moved back and forth. He made me feel truly loved. I wasn't sure where I ended and he began, our bodies fitting together in a familiarity that felt both impossible and inevitable. My hands moved on their own, tracing the hard lines of his shoulders, the smooth surface of his chest, my fingers following the droplets that still clung to his skin. There was a pain in his touch, an unspoken need that mirrored mine. When his hands came down, gripped my hips, and pulled me closer, I took a small breath. The sound swallowed by his lips as he kissed me again. Deeper this time. Hungrier. Time blurred. Seconds stretched into eternity, and we lost ourselves in each other. Every touch, every breath, every stolen moment felt like something sacred. Something we weren't meant to have, but couldn't resist. A moment I knew I wouldn't forget. A secret, intimate interlude. One that would linger in the margins of my mind, whispering about the transgression of boundaries and the dangerous allure of the forbidden,